Amber Geiger. Imagine that you're in your own home on a Thursday evening. You've just settled onto your couch with a bowl of ice cream, maybe scrolling through your phone or watching television. The door suddenly swings open. A stranger storms in, weapon drawn, shouting commands at you in your own living room. Within seconds, you're shot twice. You die in the place where you should have been safest. Now imagine the person who ended your life was a police officer who claims she thought your apartment was hers. How does someone confuse an entire apartment? How does a trained law enforcement officer fire twice before realizing she's in the wrong home? And how does the justice system respond when the line between tragic mistake and something far darker becomes impossible to ignore? On the evening of September 6th, 2018, 26-year-old Botham Jean was doing exactly what millions of people do after work. The young accountant from St. Lucia had built a promising life in Dallas, working for PricewaterhouseCoopers and dreaming of one day returning to his island nation to enter politics. He was deeply religious, passionate about social justice, and by all accounts, he was someone whose presence made the world brighter. That Thursday night, he was simply unwinding in apartment 1478 at the South Side Flats, a building just 2 blocks from Dallas Police Headquarters. He had no idea that, in moments, his ordinary evening would end in a way that would spark national outrage and force uncomfortable questions about policing, race, and accountability. 30-year-old Amber Geiger lived 1 floor below Botham in apartment 1378. She'd been a Dallas police officer for nearly 5 years, working patrol in the Cedars district. On that September evening, she just completed a 13-and-a-half-hour shift. She drove to the apartment complex, parking on the 4th floor of the garage at 9:46 in the evening. She was on the phone with her romantic partner, a conversation that continued until 9:55. What happened next would become the subject of intense scrutiny, conflicting testimony, and a legal battle that wouldn't end for years. According to Geiger's account, she believed she'd parked on the 3rd floor where her apartment was located. She walked to what she thought was her door and found it slightly ajar. She claimed she heard movement inside, felt fear, and pushed the door open. In the darkness, she said she saw a figure moving toward her in an aggressive manner. She drew her service weapon and fired twice. Only after the shots were fired did she realize she wasn't in her own apartment. The person she'd just shot wasn't an intruder. It was her upstairs neighbor, Botham Jean, who had every right to be exactly where he was. But questions emerged almost immediately. Neighbors reported hearing a woman's voice saying, "Let me in," before the gunshots. The door to Botham's apartment had a bright red doormat outside, something Geiger's apartment didn't have. The layouts were identical, but small details should have signaled she was in the wrong place. Most troubling was the forensic evidence. Crime scene experts later testified that based on the trajectory of the bullets and Botham's position, he appeared to be rising from his couch when he was shot, not advancing toward Geiger in the threatening manner she described. He'd been eating ice cream. There was no weapon, no threat. Just a young man in his own home who found himself staring down a police officer's gun. The case became a flashpoint for discussions about race and policing in America. Here was an unarmed black man, doing nothing wrong, shot and killed in his own apartment by a white police officer. Initially, Geiger was charged only with manslaughter, a decision that sparked protests and accusations of preferential treatment. The charge was later upgraded to murder after public outcry and further investigation. During the 911 call, Geiger repeated, "I thought it was my apartment," 19 times. What she never said was that Botham had a weapon or that he charged at her. Those details only appeared later, after she'd spoken with attorneys. The trial, in October 2019, was emotionally charged from start to finish. Geiger testified that she believed her life was in danger, and acted in self-defense. Prosecutors argued that even if her initial mistake was genuine, her decision to shoot rather than retreat or assess the situation constituted murder. The jury agreed. On October 1st, she was convicted and sentenced to 10 years in prison. The courtroom reaction was mixed. Some felt justice had been served. Others, including Botham's family, felt the sentence was far too lenient for taking an innocent life. In an extraordinary moment that captured national attention, Botham's younger brother Brandt addressed Geiger directly during the sentencing. He told her he forgave her and that he didn't want her to go to prison. He wanted her to give her life to Christ. He then asked the judge if he could hug her, and in a moment that left the courtroom in tears, the two embraced. It was an act of grace that many found incomprehensible given the circumstances. Geiger's legal journey didn't end with the verdict. She appealed multiple times, arguing that insufficient evidence existed for a murder conviction and that her mistaken belief about her location should have resulted in a lesser charge. Every appeal was denied. In October 2024, she was denied parole, with the board citing that her actions showed a conscious disregard for the lives, safety, or property of others. The following month, a federal jury found her liable in a civil wrongful death suit, ordering her to pay $98.6 to $5 million to Botham's family, though they acknowledge they'll likely never collect the full amount. Today, Amber Geiger remains behind bars at a facility in Gatesville, Texas. She'll face the parole board again in 2026. Botham Jean's family continues to honor his memory through the Botham Jean Foundation, working to prevent similar tragedies and keep his legacy of service alive. Susan Louise Lawrence. There's a peculiar kind of neighbor everyone fears, not the one who plays music too loud or parks badly. We're talking about the person who watches from their window with a mixture of paranoia and contempt, who sees children's laughter as a personal attack, who transforms every minor annoyance into a declaration of war. What happens when that neighbor isn't just unpleasant, but armed? What happens when years of festering resentment, racial animosity, and unaddressed mental health struggles converge behind a locked door with a loaded weapon on the other side? And what happens when a mother, simply trying to protect her child, walks up to that door and knocks? In the quiet neighborhood of Marion Oaks in Ocala, Florida, 58-year-old Susan Louise Lawrence had earned herself an unwanted reputation. For years, multiple families with children had complained about her behavior. She would emerge from her apartment to record kids playing in the shared grassy field near her home. She would yell at them, sometimes using racial slurs. On more than one occasion, neighbors reported that she had waved firearms at children. Phyllis Wills, a longtime resident, later told reporters that nearly everyone in the neighborhood had experienced conflict with Lawrence over their children. But nobody imagined just how far her hostility would go. 35-year-old Ajike Owens, known to friends and family as A.J., was a single mother raising 4 children between the ages of 3 and 12. She worked hard to provide for them and was known in the community as a loving, devoted parent who would do anything to protect her kids. On the evening of June 2nd, 2023, her children were playing in the field near their apartment complex, as they had countless times before. It was an ordinary summer evening, the kind where children run and play until the sun starts to set. But Lawrence didn't see it that way. She saw noise, she saw trespassing, she saw provocation. According to witness accounts and later court testimony, Lawrence came outside and confronted the children. An argument ensued. In a fit of anger, she threw a roller skate at one of Owen's sons, a 10-year-old boy, striking him. The child ran home and told his mother what had happened. What would any parent do in that situation? Owens did what mothers have done since the beginning of time. She walked to her neighbor's door to address what had just happened to her child. She knocked. She called out for Lawrence to come outside and talk. Her 10-year-old son stood beside her. Inside the apartment, Lawrence had already dialed 911, reporting what she described as trespassing. Deputies were already on their way when a second call came in, this one reporting gunfire. In those critical moments, Lawrence made a choice. She could have stayed in her bedroom where she kept her firearms and waited for law enforcement to arrive. She could have remained behind 2 locked doors. Instead, she retrieved her handgun, positioned herself at the front door, and without warning, without opening the door to assess the situation, she fired a single shot through the solid, windowless door. The bullet struck Ajike Owens in the upper chest. She collapsed on the ground in front of her son, who watched his mother die before his eyes. When officers arrived, they found Owens lying outside the apartment. She was transported to a local hospital, where she was later pronounced deceased. The immediate question became whether Lawrence would be arrested. She claimed self-defense, stating that she feared for her life because Owens had been pounding aggressively on her door and yelling threats. Florida's controversial Stand Your Ground law, which allows individuals to use force if they reasonably believe they're in imminent danger, complicated the situation. Marion County Sheriff Billy Woods stated publicly that his department was evaluating the law before making an arrest, a delay that sparked national outrage and accusations of racial bias in how such laws are applied. Civil rights attorney Benjamin Crump, who represented the Owens family, called the incident an unconscionable killing of a mother who simply knocked on a door. 4 days after the incident, on June 6, 2023, Lawrence was finally arrested and charged with manslaughter with a firearm. The case ignited renewed debate about stand your ground laws, self-defense claims, and the intersection of race and justice in America. Here was an unarmed black mother, shot and killed at the door of a white neighbor who felt threatened enough to shoot through a locked barrier rather than wait for police who were already on their way. The trial in August 2024 revealed disturbing details about the incident and Lawrence's state of mind. Defense attorneys argued that she genuinely feared for her life and that the law allowed her to perceive a threat even if one didn't actually exist. They presented testimony about Lawrence's history as a survivor of childhood abuse and her struggles with post-traumatic stress disorder. They painted a picture of a woman who felt cornered and afraid, but prosecutors presented a different narrative. They showed that Lawrence had options. She could have remained in her bedroom. She could have waited for law enforcement. The door was locked. Owens made no attempt to force entry. The judge himself would later note that she could have stayed in her room and put another locked door between herself and Owens, but instead came back out, positioned herself in front of the door, and at the time she fired, she was safe. After less than 3 hours of deliberation, the jury found Lawrence guilty of manslaughter with a firearm. During the sentencing hearing in November 2024, Pamela Dias, Owens's mother, delivered a statement that captured the permanent devastation inflicted on her family. She spoke of her 4 grandchildren now facing life without their mother, of pain that would last a lifetime, of a loss that could never be repaired. Lawrence, dressed in jail attire, apologized to the court, saying she never intended to take Owens's life and expressing sorrow for the family's loss. Judge Robert Hodges sentenced her to 25 years in prison, 5 years less than the maximum. Today, Susan Louise Lawrence, now 60 years old, is serving her sentence at Homestead Correctional Institution in South Florida. In a bizarre twist, she recently filed a letter threatening to countersue Owens' family for defamation, claiming the children lied in their depositions. The Owens family continues to navigate life without A.J., working through their grief while advocating for change. Her story serves as a reminder of how unchecked hostility, fear, and access to firearms can turn a neighborhood dispute into an irreversible loss that shatters multiple lives forever. Daniel Patrick Wozniak. Imagine planning your dream wedding. The venue is booked, invitations sent, bachelor party scheduled. Friends gather to celebrate your upcoming marriage. You smile, joke, and laugh with everyone who loves you. But here's the question nobody wants to ask. What if, while you're toasting champagne with your groomsmen, police are searching for dismembered body parts you scattered across town? What if your fiancée has no idea the man she's about to marry just committed 2 calculated acts of violence simply because he needed money for the honeymoon? And what if the whole time you've been smiling and performing for everyone around you, you've actually been rehearsing the biggest role of your life, the role of an innocent man? Daniel Patrick Wozniak seemed destined for the spotlight. Born on March 23, 1984, he grew up in Southern California with aspirations that extended beyond the ordinary. By his late 20s, he was actively involved in community theater in Costa Mesa, earning praise for his stage presence and natural charisma. Those who knew him described a magnetic personality, someone who could command attention in any room. He was engaged to Rachel Mae Buffett, a fellow performer who shared his passion for the arts. To their theater community, they appeared to be the perfect couple, young, talented, and deeply in love. They lived together in an apartment complex in Costa Mesa, rehearsing lines together, attending auditions, and dreaming of bigger stages. But underneath this artistic facade, Wozniak was drowning in debt he'd hidden from almost everyone. In May 2010, Wozniak was unemployed and facing mounting financial pressure. His wedding to Buffett was scheduled for May 29th, just days away. He'd planned an elaborate celebration and honeymoon he simply couldn't afford. Living in the same apartment building was 26-year-old Samuel Herr, an Afghanistan war veteran who'd served 15 months overseas before returning home to pursue his education at Orange Coast College. Sam was everything Wozniak wasn't: responsible, hardworking, disciplined. He'd saved $62,000 from his combat pay, money he'd earned, risking his life for his country. When Sam mentioned this savings to Wozniak during a casual conversation, something shifted in Wozniak's mind. Here was the solution to all his problems, sitting right next door. On May 21, 2010, Wozniak lured Herr to the Joint Forces Training Base Theater in Los Alamitos, a place where Wozniak performed regularly and had access to secluded spaces. What happened there was carefully planned. Wozniak had spent months researching online, conducting searches about how to accomplish such an act and how to dispose of remains. Sam trusted Wozniak completely, never suspecting his neighbor and friend had brought him there to end his life. The young veteran never saw it coming. But Wozniak's plan required more than just one victim. He needed someone to blame, a narrative that would send police looking in the wrong direction while he collected Sam's money and rode off into married bliss. Using Sam's phone, he sent text messages to 23-year-old Julie Kibuishi, a college student who had been tutoring Sam and was known as his close friend. Julie was studying fashion, working toward her dreams with the same determination Sam had shown. Wozniak texted her, asking to come over to Sam's apartment, mimicking his friend's writing style perfectly. Julie, thinking Sam needed help, cut short dinner with her brother and headed over. When Julie arrived at Sam's apartment, Wozniak was waiting. He ended her life and then did something that revealed just how calculated his thinking was. He staged the entire crime scene to make it appear that Sam had committed a terrible act against Julie before fleeing. He manipulated evidence, wrote messages suggesting a different story, and created a narrative designed to make Sam look like a fugitive on the run. The staging was thorough and deliberate, the work of someone who'd thought through every possible angle. The next day, May 22, 2010, Steve Herr let himself into his son's apartment after Sam failed to show up for plans they'd made. What he discovered would haunt him forever. Julie's body was in Sam's bedroom. His son was nowhere to be found. When police arrived, they initially did exactly what Wozniak had anticipated. They suspected Sam. A massive manhunt began for the missing veteran, who authorities believed had committed violence against Julie and escaped. Meanwhile, Wozniak returned to his life as if nothing had happened. That very evening, he performed in a musical production of Nine at the Liberty Theatre, the same theater where Sam's life had ended. He sang, danced, and took his bows while police searched for his victim. But Wozniak made a mistake. He needed to access Sam's money, and he recruited a 17-year-old former theater student named Wesley Freilich to make ATM withdrawals using Sam's card. When police pulled surveillance footage from the ATMs and identified Wesley, the entire investigation pivoted. 4 days after Julie's body was discovered, detectives arrested Wozniak and initially charged him as an accessory to the crimes. He told them he'd helped Sam escape, but under intense interrogation, and after police used a strategic deception about forensic findings, Wozniak's story crumbled. Eventually, he confessed that he'd taken both lives, and it was all just about the money. Wozniak was apprehended by U.S. Marshals while at his bachelor party, just 2 days before his scheduled wedding. He led authorities to El Dorado Nature Center in Long Beach, where they recovered Sam's dismembered remains. A backpack found at his parents' house contained Sam's bloody clothing, wallet, and identification. His computer revealed the disturbing scope of his planning, Google searches alternating between murder methods and honeymoon destinations. The case didn't go to trial for over 5 years. When it finally did in December 2015, prosecutor Matt Murphy presented a portrait of someone completely devoid of normal human emotion. He noted that you could literally read Wozniak's mind from his search history, which alternated between researching how to accomplish violence and looking up honeymoon ideas. Daniel Patrick Wozniak received a conviction and was sentenced in September 2016. He currently resides at Salinas Valley State Prison in California. His case became the subject of countless documentaries and crime programs, remembered as one of the most calculated crimes in recent California history. 2 families were forever shattered, 2 bright futures extinguished, all because a failed actor needed cash for a wedding that would never happen. Richard Baumhammers. What turns a lawyer into someone who maps out destruction like a military operation, an attorney who spent years helping people navigate immigration law, suddenly becomes someone who despises the very communities he once served. Picture someone driving methodically from location to location, crossing township lines, selecting targets with terrifying precision. At each stop, complete composure, no panic, no hesitation. Just a man executing a plan he'd spent months cultivating in the darkest corners of his mind and the internet. How does someone who studied the law decide to become judge, jury, and executioner based solely on the color of someone's skin or the faith they practice? And what warning signs did everyone miss in the months leading up to a spring afternoon that would forever change suburban Pittsburgh? Richard Scott Baumhammers was born on May 17, 1965, to Andres and Ines Baumhammers, both Lutheran, Latvian immigrants who fled the Soviet occupation of their homeland. His parents achieved the American dream, both becoming faculty members at the University of Pittsburgh's School of Dental Medicine and establishing a thriving practice. The family settled in Mount Lebanon, an affluent Pittsburgh suburb where Richard and his older sister, Dinah, attended excellent schools. By all external measures, Richard appeared to be on track for success. He played second-string kicker on his high school football team, graduated from Kent State University in 1989, and went on to Cumberland Law School in Alabama. He even earned a master's degree specializing in immigration and international law. But beneath this seemingly promising trajectory, something was fracturing. Baumhammers had been treated for mental illness since 1993 and had voluntarily admitted himself to a psychiatric ward at least twice. He became increasingly fixated on perceived flaws in his appearance, convinced that sunlight had scarred his face, despite dermatologists repeatedly assuring him his skin was normal. His father, Andres, would later say that he had seen signs of mental illness since Baumhammers was 4 years old. The family watched helplessly as Richard's paranoia deepened, eventually believing the FBI was monitoring their home. During the mid-1990s, Baumhammers practiced immigration law in Atlanta, Georgia, listed as an active member of the International Law section of the Georgia Bar Association. Yet even as he professionally helped immigrants navigate American legal systems, he was privately developing a hatred for the very people he served. He frequently accessed white supremacist websites and was a registered user on the neo-Nazi Stormfront forum. He downloaded materials encouraging lone wolf attacks and immersed himself in racist ideology. When he wasn't reading extremist manifestos, he was listening to white power music and forming connections with hate groups online. In the fall of 1999, an incident in Paris foreshadowed what was coming. Baumhammers was arrested for striking a 50-year-old female bartender because he believed she was Jewish. When police arrived, he told them he was mentally ill. French authorities took him to a psychiatric ward, then released him. He left for Spain days later. This was the moment law enforcement could have prevented what happened next, but the opportunity slipped away. Back in Pittsburgh, living with his parents, Baumhammers created something called the Free Market Party. It had no members except himself, but he designated himself chairman and wrote a manifesto demanding an end to Third World immigration, championing European American rights, and expressing rage that minorities were, in his view, outnumbering white people. On March 1, 2000, a mass shooting occurred in Wilkinsburg, Pennsylvania, in which 3 people were killed. Because the perpetrator, Ronald Taylor, was black and the victims were white, Baumhammers was inspired to carry out the shootings as a retaliatory copycat crime. On April 27, 2000, just 1 day before his rampage, Baumhammers purchased a Smith & Wesson .357 Magnum revolver. The next afternoon, everything he'd been planning came to fruition. At about 1 p.m. that day, Baumhammers killed Anita Gordon, 63, his next-door neighbor, and set fire to her house. Gordon was Jewish and had been friends with his parents for 31 years. She'd lived right next door, never suspecting the man on the other side of the wall harbored such contempt for her faith. From there, Baumhammers drove to Beth El Congregation in Scott Township, where Gordon worshipped. He vandalized the building, shooting out windows and spray painting swastikas on the facade. He proceeded to a Scott grocery store, where he killed Anil Tukar, 31, and left Sandeep Patel paralyzed from the neck down. Patel would die 7 years later from complications related to his injuries. Next, he killed Ji Ye's son, 34, and Tao Pham, 27, at the Yafei Chinese cuisine restaurant in Robinson before driving to C.S. Kim Karate and Center, Beaver County, where he killed 22-year-old Gary Lee, an African-American man from Aliquippa. At the karate studio, a white man named George Lester Thomas was present. Baumhammers deliberately spared him. The spree lasted 2 hours and ran a 15-mile trail that spanned 2 counties and crossed 3 townships. At each location, witnesses described Baumhammers as unnervingly calm and unhurried. Police from multiple jurisdictions coordinated a dragnet. Officer Frantangeli was stationed at the Ambridge-Aliquippa Bridge on Route 51, not expecting Baumhammers to use that route. 20 minutes later, the black Jeep Cherokee drove right up to him. After a brief chase through 2 red lights, officers surrounded the vehicle in Ambridge. They found approximately 20 live rounds in his pockets and several Molotov cocktails in the backseat. Baumhammer's surrendered without resistance. When Pittsburgh police officers searched Baumhammer's Mount Lebanon home, they found a 3-page document, described as a manifesto, which advocated the rights of European Americans and called for violence against Third World immigrants. His computer revealed months of planning, research into how to commit such acts, and visits to extremist websites alternating with travel plans and other mundane browsing. The legal battle centered on mental competency. Initially found incompetent to stand trial, Baumhammer's received treatment and was deemed competent by September 2000. His trial in May 2001 became a battleground over whether mental illness excused his actions. Prosecutor Ed Borkowski acknowledged that Baumhammer's was mentally ill, but said he was controlled, deliberate, calculating, and selective in picking victims, avoiding attention and eluding police. The jury agreed. They convicted him and sentenced him to what he would receive. Richard Baumhammer's, 54, is on Pennsylvania's death row for the April 28, 2000 murders. He remains there today due to Pennsylvania's moratorium on executions. All appeals have been denied. Families of victims continue waiting for closure that may never come. The case stands as a stark reminder of how ideology, untreated mental illness, and internet radicalization can converge into violence that shatters entire communities in just 2 hours. Raymond Boudarian. What happens when the very system designed to protect society fails to recognize danger until it's far too late? When a young man with documented mental illness, prior arrests for violence against his own family, and a history that should have triggered every alarm, instead slips through bureaucratic cracks and walks free. Imagine returning from an ordinary grocery run to find someone inside your home. You've fortified your residence with 8-foot walls, security cameras, every precaution money can buy. You've even survived one break-in already. But none of it matters because the person standing in your living room has 30 minutes to find what they came for before you walk through the door. What unfolds in those next moments will expose how profoundly broken a system can be when paperwork matters more than patterns, when mental health evaluations lead to dismissals instead of treatment, and when warning signs are documented but never acted upon. Raymond Boudarian grew up in the San Fernando Valley area of Los Angeles. Born in 2003, he lived in the Reseda and Encino neighborhoods with his family. Neighbors would later describe a young man struggling with substance abuse issues, frequently bringing other users to his residence. The visits left people frightened, according to multiple residents who spoke to media outlets. One neighbor claimed his alleged substance use created numerous problems that others complained about repeatedly. Another told reporters he was on and off medication, suggesting ongoing mental health challenges that were never properly addressed. The warning signs were there, documented in official records. Boudarian had a criminal history, including charges of brandishing a knife and making criminal threats against his stepfather in 2023, and battery against his mother and sister in 2024. These weren't strangers or acquaintances. These were members of his own family. All 3 misdemeanor cases were dismissed late last year, with court documents showing that 3 months prior, Boudarian was declared mentally incompetent. Instead of treatment, instead of intervention, the system simply dismissed the cases. Boudarian was placed under a conservatorship, which meant another adult was legally responsible for major decisions in his life because of his severe mental disorder. Yet somehow, he remained free to roam the neighborhoods of Encino. Robin Kay and Thomas DeLuca had built a life together in Encino, one of Los Angeles' more upscale communities. Both 70 years old, they represented a generation that believed hard work and success could buy safety. Kay had worked as a music supervisor for American Idol since 2009. responsible for securing licensing for songs contestants performed on the show. She was award-winning, respected throughout the industry, a cornerstone of the Idol family. DeLuca was her partner in everything. Together, they'd created what investigators later described as a highly fortified home, surrounded by an 8-foot wall topped with spikes, surveillance cameras positioned throughout the property. They'd done this because they needed to. Just months earlier, in May, they'd experienced a different break-in and had called security experts to upgrade their protection. They were frightened, and they were taking every reasonable precaution. Thursday, July 10th, 2025, started as an ordinary afternoon. Budarian is believed to have entered the couple's home through an unlocked door at around 4 p.m. He hopped a fence to access the property and found that single point of vulnerability in their otherwise fortress-like home. He was inside for approximately 30 minutes, moving through their space, searching for whatever he could take. A neighbor's renter spotted someone jumping the fence and called 911. Dispatch records show LAPD officers arrived at about 5 p.m., checked the perimeter, found no signs of forced entry or trouble, and left the scene. Nobody answered when they knocked. Everything looked secure from the outside. Kay and DeLuca returned home from the grocery store and found him there. What happened next was captured by the couple's own security cameras. There was a confrontation, a struggle between two 70-year-olds and a 22-year-old intruder. District Attorney Nathan Hochman later revealed that the weapon used belonged to Kay and DeLuca. Their own firearm, likely kept for protection in a home they'd already fortified, became the instrument of their demise. They were shot multiple times, in separate rooms, suggesting they tried to flee or defend themselves. Budarian left the scene on foot. 4 days passed. Family members couldn't reach the couple. Monday, July 14th, 2025. Police conducted a welfare check. Officers saw blood at the door and made the discovery that would devastate a community and expose systemic failures that had enabled this outcome. Budarian was arrested on Tuesday by LAPD detectives and members of an FBI fugitive task force after they used security camera video and facial recognition software to identify him. Fingerprints found at the scene matched his on file from his previous arrests. Investigators found the handgun at his residence. The day after his arrest, he actually called police himself and provided his name, according to District Attorney Hochman. Raymond Budarian, 22, was charged with 1 count of residential burglary and 2 counts of murder in the deaths of Robin Kay and Thomas DeLuca. If convicted on all counts, he could face life in prison without parole or potentially face other severe penalties. His arraignment, originally scheduled for July 17th, was continued to August 20th. During the brief court hearing that did occur, Budarian hid behind a door, never showing his face. He could barely be heard when he acknowledged understanding the timeline. Over 100 concerned Encino residents attended a public safety meeting hosted by the Encino Neighborhood Council, demanding answers about how someone with Budarian's documented history of violence and mental incompetence was free to commit such acts. Criminal defense attorney Lou Shapiro explained how California's legal system may have enabled this outcome. The state has separate courts for people with mental health issues. If eligible, defendants get placed on a different track. Most do well under this system, but occasionally, as Shapiro noted, things don't go the way they should, and the results can be devastating. Today, Raymond Budarian remains in custody, without bail, awaiting trial. 2 families are shattered. A community questions whether safety is possible when systems fail. And the case stands as a stark reminder that documentation without action, evaluations without follow-through, and dismissals without treatment can create conditions where the most vulnerable among us to pay with their lives for bureaucratic failures no wall can keep out. Jonathan Eddington. How does a phone call destroy 3 lives in a matter of minutes? Think about the last time someone told you something so alarming that your entire world shifted in an instant. Your heart races. Your mind goes blank except for one overwhelming thought. And suddenly nothing matters except responding to what you just heard. Now imagine that information turns out to be wrong. Imagine that your reaction to false information leads you to commit an act so irreversible, so permanent, that no amount of truth revealed afterward can undo what happened. What if the person you trusted most in the world gave you information that wasn't verified, wasn't investigated, wasn't even questioned before you acted on it? And what if your neighbor, someone struggling with their own demons but fundamentally decent, died because of words spoken in haste and believed without pause? Jonathan Eddington seemed to have built the kind of life many people aspire to achieve. Born on October 29, 1976, he pursued education with determination, graduating from Syracuse University before earning his law degree from Fordham Law School. By 2006, he was working as a patent lawyer in Fairfield, Connecticut, a profession requiring precision, careful analysis, and attention to detail. He lived on Colony Street with his wife Christina and their 2-year-old daughter, in what appeared to be a quiet, comfortable suburban existence. Neighbors described him as reserved, professional, someone who kept to himself but seemed to have everything under control. Next door, at 101 Colony Street, lived 59-year-old Barry Charles James. James worked at a funeral home and lived with his elderly mother, caring for her despite his own health challenges. He suffered from a heart condition and type 2 diabetes and needed help to walk upstairs. James had battled alcoholism and served 2 days in prison in May 2001 on a drunk driving charge. Some neighbors mentioned he exhibited unusual behavior at times, but nobody saw him as a danger. He was simply a man dealing with his struggles while taking care of his aging mother. The relationship between the Eddingtons and James had experienced some tension. Police had gone to the neighborhood before, when Eddington called to complain that he could see James through a window, stating that either he was partly clothed or revealed parts of his anatomy that were inappropriate. It was an uncomfortable situation but seemed manageable through normal channels. Then came August 28, 2006. Christina Eddington was visiting relatives in Rhode Island with their daughter when something happened that would set a catastrophe in motion. The 2-year-old girl complained to her mother that Barry James had repeatedly molested her. Christina immediately called her husband to inform him. What transpired next happened with terrifying speed. Within minutes of receiving that phone call, Eddington's world narrowed to a single purpose. According to the affidavit, within minutes, Eddington went next door to 101 Colony Street in Fairfield, where he found Barry James and stabbed him 13 times in the heart, chest, and hand. After stabbing his neighbor, Jonathan Eddington walked back to his house and calmly called 911. The recording, played years later in court, captured his composed voice, telling the dispatcher an ambulance and police were needed at 101 Colony Street because there had been a stabbing. When pressed about who committed the act, he hung up. James died about an hour later at Bridgeport Hospital. James' 87-year-old mother lived with him and discovered the body. Rita James, who was 91 by the time of civil proceedings, recalled in a videotaped deposition walking into her son's bedroom to see Eddington confronting him. He was saying something to Barry about his daughter, the frail woman recalled. Her son responded that he didn't even know the daughter, and then she saw Eddington pounding his fist over and over into the victim's chest. When officers arrived at the Eddington home, they found him at the kitchen sink washing Barry James' blood off his hands and forearms. He was arrested and charged with murder and burglary. But then came the part of this story that transforms it from straightforward crime into something far more complicated and troubling. Fairfield police launched a comprehensive 100-hour investigation into Christina Eddington's claim that Barry James had molested their daughter. They interviewed the child. They tested her bedding and clothing. They checked her bedroom window for James's fingerprints. They examined every piece of potential evidence. Captain Gary McNamara stated that they were confident the 2-year-old was not molested, and confident in their investigation that James did not molest the Eddington's daughter. No evidence of any molestation was found. None. The investigation that cleared Barry James was thorough, professional, and conclusive. In June 2007, Eddington pleaded guilty to a reduced charge of first-degree manslaughter. On Friday, August 31, 2007, Judge Richard Comerford sentenced him to 20 years in prison, with 8 years suspended, leaving 12 years to serve plus 5 years probation. The judge described it as a Shakespearean tragedy brought into the real world, noting that something was set into motion in this man's mind, real or perceived, and that it was very real to him. But the judge had pointed words for someone else in the courtroom. Without naming Christina Eddington directly, Comerford stated that there was a certain responsibility that lay not only with this man, but with others in that courtroom. Someone else would have to live with this on their conscience. As far as the blame for the situation, it lay at his feet, but there was one other individual who may be considered to have some degree of culpability. He wouldn't want to have this on his conscience. Christina Eddington refused to cooperate with the investigation into the slaying. State's Attorney Jonathan Benedict revealed that a defense psychiatrist determined she suffered from postpartum depression. As the sentence was read, she collapsed, crying. As Eddington was led away, she tearfully insisted that she knew the truth of their allegations. Eddington himself murmured that he didn't care what they said. He knew James had molested his daughter. The James family filed wrongful death lawsuits against both Jonathan and Christina Eddington. They filed an order in Bridgeport Superior Court for a $5 million lien against Eddington's property. From prison, Eddington sent letters insisting the investigation was a sham and that James was guilty despite all evidence to the contrary. Jonathan Eddington served his sentence and was released. Today, the case remains a study in how quickly tragedy can unfold when unverified information meets overwhelming emotion, when trust replaces verification, and when the irreversible consequences of one phone call echo through multiple lives forever. Michael Dunn. There are arguments we've all had, disagreements over noise, parking spaces, property lines. Most of us walk away frustrated, maybe muttering under our breath. We vent to our friends. We roll our eyes, and we move on with our lives. But what separates the vast majority of humanity from the few who cross an unthinkable line? What internal switch flips in someone's mind that transforms annoyance into violence, irritation into irreversible action? When does a complaint about volume become a reason to end a life? And how does someone convince themselves that their momentary discomfort justifies destroying not just one future, but dozens, families, friends, communities, all because they couldn't tolerate a few minutes of music they didn't like? Michael David Dunn seemed to have achieved a version of the American dream. Born in 1966, he'd built a career as a software developer in Satellite Beach, Florida, working for a defense contractor. By his mid-40s, he was engaged to Rhonda Rua, planning a future together. On November 23, 2012, the day after Thanksgiving, Dunn attended his son's wedding with Rua. It was supposed to be a celebration, a joyful family occasion. The couple left the reception early, deciding to head back to their bed and breakfast in St. Augustine. They stopped at a Gate Petroleum gas station in Jacksonville so Rua could pick up a bottle of wine. It was an ordinary errand, the kind millions of people make every day. Rua went inside. Dunn stayed in the car, parked next to a red Dodge Durango. Inside that Durango were 4 teenage boys: Tommy Stornes, Leland Brunson, Jordan Davis, and Tevin Thompson, who had been spending the day traveling to various malls when they decided to stop at the gas station to buy gum and cigarettes. Stornes left his SUV running while he went into the store. Brunson Davis and Thompson remained in the vehicle, listening to music described as very loud. For Dunn, sitting in his car waiting for his fiancée, the music became unbearable. Rua later testified that before she left him in the car, he told her, "I hate that thug music." That phrase would become crucial. Not just loud music, thug music. A loaded term that revealed the racial prejudice simmering beneath his irritation. What happened next lasted only seconds, but would dominate headlines for years. Dunn asked the teens to turn down their music. Words were exchanged. The exact nature of the confrontation would be disputed in court, but the undeniable facts are these. Dunn pulled a 9mm handgun from his glove compartment and fired 9 shots into the SUV. 3 of his shots struck Jordan Davis, one of them cutting through his liver, a lung, and his aorta. The 17-year-old died from his wounds. The other 3 teens, though fired upon, miraculously weren't hit. No weapon was ever found in the Durango. None. Dunn claimed he saw Jordan holding a shotgun or a lead pipe, claimed he heard death threats, claimed he feared for his life, but nobody else saw any weapon. Investigators tore that vehicle apart, looking for anything that could support Dunn's story. They found nothing. Here's where the case becomes even more revealing about Dunn's character and state of mind. After shooting Davis, neither Dunn nor Rua called police. They drove 40 miles to their bed and breakfast in St. Augustine. And once there, Dunn took his dog for a walk, and Rua ordered a pizza and movie. Think about that. A teenage boy lay dying because of bullets Dunn fired, and his response was to walk his puppy, order pizza, and go to sleep. In the morning, Rua watched a news report about the shooting, and the two then drove another 130 miles home to Satellite Beach, where Dunn was apprehended. When asked during his trial why he never called authorities, Dunn said, "It makes sense that I should have contacted authorities. We didn't. I can't tell you why." That admission was damning. If you genuinely fear for your life, if you truly believe you've just survived a deadly encounter, you call police immediately. You don't casually drive to your hotel, walk your dog, and sleep soundly. You don't spend the next morning driving home as if nothing happened. The first trial, in February 2014, became a national flashpoint, drawing inevitable comparisons to the Trayvon Martin case. The jury found Dunn guilty on 3 counts of attempted second-degree murder for shooting at the other teens in the car and 1 count of firing a gun into a vehicle. But they deadlocked on the charge of first-degree murder for Jordan Davis's death, and a mistrial was declared on that count. The attempted murder charges alone carried a minimum sentence of 60 years. But for Jordan's parents, Ron Davis and Lucia McBath, that wasn't justice. Their son deserved recognition as a victim of murder, not just collateral damage in an attempted murder case. Prosecutors decided to retry Dunn on the murder charge. In October 2014, after deliberating 4.5 hours, a jury returned a verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. Judge Russell Healy sentenced Dunn to life in prison without parole, plus an additional 90 years for the attempted murder convictions and firing into a vehicle. Before sentencing, Jordan's mother addressed the court and Dunn directly. "I too must be willing to forgive," she said. "And so I choose to forgive you, Mr. Dunn, for taking my son's life. I pray that God has mercy on your soul." Jordan's father wasn't ready for forgiveness. "My life as I had known it was shattered on November 23, 2012, Ron Davis told the court. "I now call it Black Friday for a completely different reason. After the longest hour of my life, the hospital confirmed that Jordan Russell Davis was deceased in the emergency room. The old Ron Davis died that night with Jordan." When Dunn finally apologized, Ron Davis rejected it as insincere. You can tell the defense attorney wrote that for him. It was not heartfelt. There wasn't a tear in his eyes, no tremble in his voice. He had no remorse whatsoever. Dunn appealed multiple times, and in 2021, the Florida Supreme Court rejected his appeal based on the Stand Your Ground law. Today, Michael Dunn remains incarcerated, serving life without possibility of parole. Jordan Davis's mother, Lucy McBath, channeled her grief into action, running for Congress and winning, advocating for gun reform, and keeping her son's memory alive through activism. The case became the subject of multiple documentaries and sparked renewed national conversation about racial profiling, stand your ground laws, and the devastating consequences when irritation escalates to irreversible violence over something as trivial as music volume. David John Graytack. Noise complaints between neighbors are as old as apartment living itself. Footsteps from upstairs, music through thin walls, voices carrying through vents. Most people endure the irritation, maybe knock on a door to ask politely for quiet, or file a complaint with management. Some people call the police, a rare few move out. But what kind of person decides that the only solution to noise from above is to wait with a weapon, ready to confront not just the disturbance, but the very people creating it? When does annoyance transform into something so consuming that a person convinces themselves their comfort matters more than someone else's life? And how do you claim self-defense when surveillance cameras capture every second of what really happened? David John Graytack lived in an apartment at Forest Ridge Apartments on Chambers Road in San Antonio, Texas. By 2023, he was 56 years old and had developed what neighbors would describe as an obsession with the sounds coming from the unit directly above his. Lydia Morales, 44 years old, lived in the apartment unit directly above Graytack with her family. According to defense testimony presented at trial, Graytack had previously complained to the apartment complex about Morales and her family, but no action was taken. The complaints focused on noise, footsteps, voices, the ordinary sounds of a family living their lives. For most people, this would be frustrating but manageable. For Graytack, it became an all-consuming source of resentment. September 12, 2023, started as an ordinary day for Lydia Morales. She invited a few family members over to her apartment in San Antonio. They were having a good time, with some drinks and music. It was the kind of gathering that happens in homes across America every day. Family members laughing, talking, enjoying each other's company. However, at one point in the night, Morales and her family heard a noise coming from the downstairs apartment. It was Graytack's unit. Some of the people at Morales' apartment began leaving at that time, but almost everybody made it before passing by Graytack's apartment. A man who was said to be the boyfriend of Morales' daughter was waiting outside Graytack's door for his girlfriend to come downstairs. At that time, he made a gesture to the peephole when the 56-year-old came outside with a gun. According to testimony from prosecutor Daniel Alvarado, Graytack exited his apartment and approached the young man. The two got into a verbal dispute, and Graytack tripped and fell. The situation was escalating, but it was still just words. Nobody had been harmed. Nobody needed to get hurt. As the two argued, Morales and her daughter exited the apartment. The women saw Graytack on the ground with a gun, and Morales placed herself between Graytack and her family members. It was an act of maternal instinct, the kind of protective impulse that defines parenthood. She was trying to de-escalate, trying to shield her loved ones from whatever was about to happen. Prosecutor Melissa Rust would later tell the jury that Graytack had had enough of Morales not doing what he wanted her to do, which was be quiet. The video is so clear that we're talking about seconds from her coming down those stairs to being shot. Alvarado told jurors that Morales put her hand up as if to say stop, and the only thing she could say was what's going on before the defendant fired a gun and shot her. Morales was shot once on the right side of her chest. Rust emphasized that all she could say was what's going on before the defendant shot her. He shot her in the right side of her chest. Morales was placed in an ambulance, but was pronounced dead before the emergency vehicle could leave the scene. After police were called, Grachtak told police that the shooting was in self-defense. According to a San Antonio Police Department report, Grachtak told an officer he believed Morales was about to stab him because he thought he saw her holding something shiny. The DA's office noted that Grachtak claimed that his action was a form of self-defense, as he believed that Morales was going to stab him first. But there was a problem with his story. A significant problem. Surveillance video evidence presented during the trial contradicted his account. The cameras captured everything. They showed the confrontation, the argument, and the moment Grachtak fired. They showed Lydia Morales with her hand raised, trying to understand what was happening, trying to protect her family, asking a simple question before her life ended. The trial for the case initially began in May. However, at that time, the jury failed to reach a unanimous verdict, resulting in a mistrial. In the first trial, jurors failed to reach a unanimous verdict after hours of deliberations. State District Judge Cristina Escalona declared a mistrial in the case, leaving the door open for Grachtak to be retried. The prosecution wasn't finished. They believed the evidence was clear, and they were determined to secure justice for Lydia Morales. The retrial began in July 2025. This time, the second jury heard the same evidence, watched the same surveillance footage, and listened to the same testimony about a man who had complained for years about noise but had never moved, never found another solution, never considered that his neighbor had as much right to live in her home as he did in his. In July, another trial began, where Grachtak was found guilty of murdering Lydia Morales. After the jury found the evidence presented did not prove his actions were justified, Judge Cristina Escalona of the 186th District Court handed down the sentence to David Grachtak in September 2025. He received 30 years in prison for taking Lydia Morales' life. Joe Gonzalez, the Bexar County DA, said in a statement that though today's sentencing is a painful reminder of an act of senseless violence, it proves that we will never waver in our fight for justice. David John Grachtak is now serving his 30-year sentence in the Texas prison system. Lydia Morales' family continues to grieve a mother, a relative, a friend whose final words was simply asking what was going on. Her daughter, who watched her mother die trying to protect her. Her family members, who came together for an ordinary gathering and left with a trauma that will last forever. The case stands as a reminder that claiming self-defense means nothing when cameras capture the truth, and that no amount of noise from upstairs justifies ending a life over irritation that could have been resolved 1,000 different ways. Robert William Fisher. Sometimes the most terrifying neighborhood isn't defined by a dangerous street or a rough part of town. Sometimes it's defined by the house where a family seemed perfect from the outside. A Navy veteran turned firefighter and medical professional living with his wife and 2 children in an upscale Arizona suburb. The kind of place where neighbors wave hello, where kids ride bikes in cul-de-sacs, where nothing bad is supposed to happen. But what darkness can fester when a man's deepest childhood trauma becomes the blueprint for his adult fears? When the thought of reliving his parents' divorce becomes so unbearable that he'd rather erase his entire family than face that pain again? And what happens when a man who knows how to start fires, who understands survival in the wilderness, and who has months to plan decides that if he can't have his family, nobody will? Robert William Fisher was born on April 13, 1961, in Brooklyn, New York City. His father was William Fisher, a banker, and his mother was Jan Howell. They had 3 children, Robert and 2 daughters. The parents divorced in 1976, when Robert was 15. After this, he and his sisters went to live with their father in Arizona. To anyone who knew him, the divorce wasn't just a life event. It became the defining trauma that shaped everything about who Robert Fisher would become. According to friends and relatives, the divorce was turbulent and had long-lasting effects on him. A friend from high school stated Robert was very bitter about it. By 2001, Fisher appeared to have constructed a stable life in Scottsdale. He'd served in the United States Navy, worked as a firefighter, and later transitioned to work in the medical field at Mayo Clinic Hospital. He was married to Mary Fisher, and together they had 2 children, 12-year-old Brittany and 10-year-old Bobby. They lived at 2223 North 74th Place, in an upscale Scottsdale neighborhood where families felt safe and life seemed predictable. But underneath that surface, the marriage was crumbling. A police document that spans more than 400 pages details a rocky marriage between Robert and Mary. According to interviews compiled in the Scottsdale Police Report, Fisher had admitted to an affair roughly 2 years before the fire. Fisher was kicked out of the house, but he and Mary ultimately reconciled and continued their rocky relationship, according to the report. But reconciliation wasn't healing. Mary told several friends in the weeks leading up to April 2001 that she was planning to divorce Fisher. Fisher told a hunting companion that he was renewing his commitment to his faith and marriage because he could not live without his family, possibly hinting that he would consider suicide over divorce. For Fisher, history was repeating itself. The trauma he'd carried for 25 years since his parents split was about to become his children's reality, and he couldn't allow that to happen. A neighbor reported hearing a loud argument coming from inside the Fisher home at 10 p.m. on April 9, 2001, approximately 10 hours before it exploded into flames. At 10:43 p.m., Fisher was spotted on an ATM camera where he withdrew $280. Mary's Toyota 4Runner was in the background. New witnesses later came forward who saw Mary's SUV at 3:30 a.m. and one at 5:30 a.m. at the Fisher house, confirming he definitely did not flee immediately and was still home 7 hours later. The morning of April 10, 2001, began with an explosion that rocked the neighborhood. At 8:42 a.m., a residence at 2223 North 74th Place exploded and burst into flames. Neighbors rushed out of their homes as firefighters, Fisher's former colleagues, raced to extinguish the blaze. Authorities found the bodies of Mary Fisher, 38, and the couple's children, Robert Jr., 10, and Brittany, 13, in their beds amid debris. All 3 had their throats slashed, while Mary Fisher also had suffered a gunshot wound to the head. It is believed that the father, Robert William Fisher, murdered Mary, Brittany, and Bobby Jr., then ruptured the house's gas line to conceal the homicides. This delayed fuse would have given him an approximate 10-hour head start in his successful attempt to evade law enforcement. Robert Fisher had vanished. A tip from a camper led police to Mary's Toyota 4Runner, tucked deep in the woods, east of Young, Arizona. The SUV was wiped clean. The family's dog, Blue, was found guarding it on the outside. Laurie Greenbeck, an acquaintance of the Fisher family, said that her husband had gone camping with Fisher in the area where the truck was found shortly before April 10th. She said that her husband believed that Fisher was scouting the area. According to her, he was very familiar with the region. A massive 3-day manhunt, involving more than 100 officers, searched caves and mountainous terrain. But Fisher had seemingly disappeared into the wilderness he knew so well. On July 19th, a state arrest warrant was issued in Phoenix, charging Fisher with 3 counts of murder and 1 count of arson. Subsequently, he was declared a fugitive, and a federal arrest warrant was issued by the United States District Court for the District of Arizona, charging him with unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. On June 29, 2002, He was added to the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list, where he remained for nearly 20 years. The FBI offered a $100,000 reward for information leading to his arrest. They released age-enhanced photographs showing what Fisher might look like as he aged. Tips came in regularly, but none led to his capture. On November 3, 2021, Fisher was removed from the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list. The FBI says although Fisher remains at large, he no longer fits established criteria for continued inclusion on the list because the extensive publicity Fisher's case received during its nearly 20 years on the list has not resulted in his successful location and capture. Today, Robert William Fisher would be 63 years old. Whether he's alive or deceased remains one of Arizona's greatest unsolved mysteries. Some investigators believe he died in the wilderness shortly after fleeing. Others think he's living under an assumed identity, possibly in another country. What's certain is that 3 lives ended because one man's childhood trauma became an adult obsession, because the fear of divorce outweighed every other human instinct, and because a Scottsdale neighborhood learned that the most dangerous person can be the one living right next door, nursing wounds from decades past until they explode into present-day devastation.